Hey, welcome to Agent Provocateur. How to be an agent part 2, or so you want to be an agent, I guess. And Allan, before we get into that, something that came up, I noticed on your Twitter account this week, and it's something that we've talked about. I've talked about it on the Steve Dangle podcast a bunch of times. It's the fact that we have a ton of teams who are circumventing the cap legally, and it raises the issue of whether a hard cap is really even in effect, and if there aren't better options out there like a luxury tax. I know luxury tax freaks people out because they've seen what happens in the MLB with it. Let's start with LTI. Can you explain for the layman, for people like me, LTI from the player's side, from the agent side, how does it work and how are teams using it to circumvent the cap?
Right. So LTI is long-term injury. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's referred to as LTI or LTIR, long-term injured reserve. And for a player certified by the team's medical staff to be injured and unable to play to the extent of missing 10 games, the next 10 games, or 24 calendar days is the definition within the CBA. That player then goes on LTI. While on LTI, that player's AAV can be used to, if the team is at the cap, which this year is $82.5 million, that team could now exceed the salary cap, the upper limit of the cap, by the amount of the player's AAV on injured reserve. So that's the definition. So you take a team like Tampa, last year Stanley Cup winner, when Kucherov came off LTI at the start of the playoffs, their actual payroll by AAV was over $93 million. So it causes amongst the other teams in the league, you hear in conversations, general managers very unhappy that there are a few teams that are able to spend to that amount. Obviously, you need to have a commitment from ownership to be able to go there. And this year right now, with Vegas, with Stone going on LTI, Eichel being activated, you've got also Martinez is on LTI. So that's for you. You're in the high 90s right now, mid to high 90s with Vegas's payroll.
They're spending the second most amount of money in the league.
Right. So that bleeds into the next real issue to discuss because they're interrelated. Why not have a luxury tax? Something that I've advocated for. It was part of the CBA negotiations back in 94, 95. It was actually back in the negotiations there. It was a central aspect of the NHLPA's position during the lockout in 2004, 2005. Gary advocated for a triple hard cap system with no ability to go over the upper limit other than through something like LTI. It's been used more extensively in the last few years than it has been since 2005. But a luxury tax with meaningful revenue sharing makes so much more sense for the NHL right now. There are approximately 18, 19 teams that are at the upper limit. Number of teams are into LTI right now. If you just allow teams to spend over the upper limit, but pay a tax for each threshold, whether it's $2.5 million over the upper limit, they pay a 25% tax. $5 million over the upper limit, between 2.5 and 5 million, you pay a 50% tax. 5 million to 7.5 million, you pay a 75% tax. 7.5 million to 10 million, you pay 100% tax. You're allowing teams have the commitment from ownership to spend to that level, but the cap is preventing them from doing it, all with the the league waving the flag of competitive balance, and we can't let the big markets outspend the small markets. And that argument is a total fallacy because the floor is 60 million. So you had last year some teams, the smaller markets, just hitting the floor during the season, but the Tampas of the world were at 93 million.
Right.
Who won the Stanley Cup?
Tampa.
With their 93 million.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. So you've got a 30 plus million variance. Where's the competitive balance? The whole cost certainty Gary Bettman argument is an illusion. It's been his great magic trick that he's played on the fans and the media, brainwashing them since 2005. And on Twitter, I see all the time, competitive balance. We can't have a tax. We need the cap. Competitive balance. You've been brainwashed. You've been brainwashed. It doesn't exist. You're always going to have the bigger markets have the financial wherewithal and the power to be able to go out there and spend. Why not let them spend what they already want to spend? Why should we prevent them from doing that if they can then pay a tax that they're willing to pay, and you have that tax going to the smaller markets as their revenue share?
Because right now that LTIR space is not being taxed, correct?
That's right. It's not. So
what is the tax based on? What's the equalization payment based on currently?
Currently, there's a formula in the CBA where a certain number of teams who fit within a certain demographic of attendance, size of the market, and so forth, qualify for revenue sharing. And there is a certain amount that goes into the pot and then gets distributed. But it is not a meaningful number. It never has been, because NHL owners don't want to support their brethren who are billionaires, but not willing to put that money into their payroll, right?
Right.
They're billionaires. I mean, every NHL owner is technically a billionaire. When we're talking about revenue share money of $5 million, $6 million, $7 million a year. Yeah, it's a drop in the bucket. It's a drop in the bucket. But now, what people don't understand is that by having a luxury tax, the system in and of itself becomes self-regulating, right? Because teams know if they're spending to a certain level, the money they're spending is going to trigger the tax, which is then going to their competitors, which they hate. So it becomes in the analysis, in the thinking process of a club, if we spend to this level, we get to retain our players. Because one of the biggest issues with the cap is it forces teams that otherwise would be willing to sign and retain their players. It forces them to trade players, good players, sometimes some of their best players, or allow them to go to free agency because they don't have the cap space to keep the team together. Think Chicago Blackhawks after being successful. Think Tampa Bay Lightning in a year. Anytime a team gets really successful, they are then faced with being capped out a year or two down the road after rewarding the players that helped them get to the finals, win a cup. And now they've got to trade some of their best players away. Is that good for hockey? No. It's not. Is it good for the NHL? No. It's one of the only sports that forces teams to get rid of good players. They have the money to sign them. They want to sign them, but they don't have the cap space to sign them. That's just plain wrong. And a tax would alleviate that problem. But the NHL, primarily Gary Bettman, has been adamant that he doesn't ever want to open the system up to let teams even retain their stars. And one other thing, in some sports, you have, a bird exception where you can franchise tag a player, or you can spend the money on a player that you've drafted, but not a player that you've traded for. There are different ways to get to the same point. The real import of this is Gary Bettman won't allow or even consider the players to go down that road. And it's bad for hockey. It's bad for the NHL. It's bad for the fans and the people who are, but we need this competitive balance. Come on. Look at the situation.
Well, let's talk about competitive balance just for a moment before we get into this. And I know we got to wrap this up, but Allan, and we'll come back to this. This is something we're absolutely going to cover more and more as Agent Provocateur goes on. One of the things that they talk about is, well, I'm a small market fan. I'm a fan in Nashville. I'm a fan in Arizona. I'm a fan in, name your city. I'm a fan in a lot of the Canadian cities. A lot of Canadians get freaked out about this because we saw 2 Canadian teams go south in the 90s. I'm a fan of this team. And I know the Torontos, the Bostons, the New Yorks, the Phillies, they're all going to be able to spend ballistic money. Tampa Bay now too, obviously. They're going to spend crazy, crazy money. I'm concerned that my team will not be able to compete. Allan, since the hard cap was instituted, what teams have done the best? And have we seen a leveling off of the field in terms of parity in the NHL, which they seem to want to always have?
I don't think we have any parity in the NHL. When you look at the bigger markets who consistently seem to win the cup every year, we have exceptions. There have been exceptions. Hockey is more than just the cost of your payroll per se. There's lots of other factors that go into it. But when you look at who's won the cup since 2005, and you look at the Chicago's, the Los Angeles's, the teams that have won multiple cups, and I consider Tampa, yes, it's not a huge market, but they have one of the richest owners in the NHL, 100% committed to spending what it takes to win. So I don't consider that a small market.
Right.
We're talking about teams that traditionally, you mentioned some of them, that have traditionally been more towards the floor than towards the top of the upper limit. So I think that when you look at that, right, like I said before, there is an illusion. The NHL sells the illusion of parity to justify the salary cap. Right. Why do we have a cap? What is the primary reason why Gary Bettman and the NHL owners, pushed so hard for a cap? The salary cap is directly related to the value of NHL franchises. And what you saw is once we had the cap instituted in 2005, at first it was slower, but there was a slow, steady rise in the value of franchises, right? You've now been able to control your cost of labor. And now as more revenue comes in, the value of the underlying business is worth more. But what you've seen the last 5 years has been an explosion of franchise values. And under this current CBA, because of the pandemic, we might have a flat cap for 4 to 5 years to pay off the escrow debt that accumulated over the last 2 years. Right?
Yeah.
So yes, the players received more money upfront than the 50-50 split of HRR in the CBA. And that money is now going to be paid back over a number of years to equalize again completely at 50-50. But the underlying value of franchises have exploded. They've exploded. And the players don't share in that at all. And that's why we have a salary cap.
And there it is. So let's get into, so you want to be an agent, an NHL agent, part 2 with the one and only Allan Walsh.
Thank you. One last thing.
Oh, sorry.
I'd like to wish a very happy birthday to my great friend, Jeff Applebaum, and to my great friend, Daniel Baker, who both share a birthday on the same day and are both big fans of the podcast. So I just wanted to give them a little shout out.
Happy birthday to them. I guess that takes us to, and Steve always says this on the podcast, you know, when there's a contract negotiation with an RFA and it's going all summer long, and especially in Leafland, you know, a couple of years ago with Nylander and Marner and some other contracts, there were some anxiety inducing moments. And Steve would always say, what the hell do these people do all day? What are they doing all day, these agents and these general managers? So what does an agent actually do? What's your day-to-day look like?
My day-to-day is usually pretty chaotic and hectic. I personally believe in trying to touch as many players as I can, whether by text or phone call. You sort of get into the rhythm, you know, East Coast, when guys are heading to the rink, many times they'll pick up the phone and call, you know, in the mornings for practice. Some guys don't like to be contacted at all on game day. You just focus on the game. You get to know what players' preferences are. Some players are in the hotel in the afternoon and they're completely open to talking, and whether it's game day or not. You kind of learn that over time. But in between talking to players and dealing with any issues of the day, you know, because part of what we do is I'm walking around all day with a fire hose on my back and I'm just putting out different fires here and there. So some days you feel more like a fireman than an agent, but that's part of the job description. You know, depending on the time of year, you're preparing negotiation files. You could be working on potential arbitrations. You're managing your business. That's talking to people who you're working with all over the world. I'll have conference calls with people and Zoom calls with people in Czech Republic and different parts of Europe and all over Canada, and the people that we work with. There's a lot of administrative work that goes into helping to run an agency. So there's a whole host of different things in that world. And then, of course, and you recall we had Frank Zecca on as a guest early on in the genesis of Agent Provocateur. But I deal very closely with the people in financial services working on the financial side. And the monthly summaries are always getting prepared, and I always review them. And then we review them with the clients. And there's a lot of that too. Just keeping players, you know, always on track financially and career-wise with what the plan is, whether it's a budget on the financial side and the monthly summaries, or on the hockey side. Hey, here was our plan in the summer. Here's where we were in September, October. Here's where we are now. And talk a little bit about the plan going forward. You know, I don't believe in just letting things happen by happenstance, by chance. I think it's very important to have a plan, to present a plan, to together agree on a step forward, and that takes a lot of time, you know, a lot of effort. It's sometimes better to sit with players face to face when you're talking about their careers. So there's all of that, and there's other things, more nuanced stuff like making sure everybody's career-ending disability insurance is up to date, and under review. Usually do that, just before training camp starts, where there's a bit of a scramble, making sure everybody's got their policies renewed, and it's a very critical aspect to the representation of players. So depending on the month, depending on where we are in the season, your days vary a little bit, but there isn't a lot of downtime, and there's not a lot of time where you're not doing anything. And then, of course, starting in California, 4 p.m. is when the games start being played, and that's when I'm starting to watch clients play both NHL, American League, up on the different screens, and keeping an eye on their progress.
And when we were kind of talking about outlining the show, obviously it's very different when you're talking about a junior or NCAA player versus what it would be in the AHL, the NHL, or the ECHL. So when you're dealing with a player that was Marc-Andre Fleury's age when you met him, when he went to Cape Breton, he was 16, I think. What kind of things go into the day-to-day of managing a junior player?
What you want to do is you want to establish the personal connection with the player, while at the same time staying out of the way.
Okay.
And understand that it's junior hockey. The business is going to become much more of a business pretty soon. Mm-hmm. You try to let the players enjoy the game. And basically what I did in Mark's draft year was try to keep as much of the noise about being a highly touted prospect, a goaltender, especially after the World Juniors that year, after he had that outstanding World Juniors in Halifax, where he was sick and out and on the bench, and then Team Canada's goalie got pulled, and he came in, and the fans were all chanting Fleury, 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 and they ended up winning. And I think it was important after that, when people started talking about him as the number one overall pick, or at least in that discussion, to try to shield him from as much of the craziness, the chaos, and the noise, and let him just go out and play hockey and stop the puck. And by the time we got to the draft, there had already been a real good bond that had developed between us. But I tried to shield him from as much as I could. And then by the time we got to the draft is when, okay, here it's happening. The trade happened. You're going to go number one overall, but now it's important to understand that it's now become a business.
Right. And then the Mario Lemieux story.
Right.
Now, how do you help a player make a decision, Allan, as an agent, between junior and the NCAA?
Well, everybody's different. And for some players, the better route for them to go is to play major junior. And for others, the better route for them as a player and as a person is to go NCAA. And I always saw my role is in helping the player and his family discover what route is best for them. And what may be best for John may not be what's best for Tommy. And my role was to bring them all the information I could possibly bring them so they could process it and say, ask a lot of questions, talk to a lot of different people, and say, you know what, now that we've had all of this information to consider, and now that we've talked about it and met about it, and we've asked you questions, you've asked us questions, we've talked to other people, this is the direction we want to go in. But the decision has to come from them. And your job is to facilitate that decision by giving them all the information they need to come to that conclusion.
So there is no right or wrong answer. it's just person to person. You got to make that call.
Exactly. And again, everybody's different.
And when it comes to, and I can call myself out on this one, there's different kinds of hockey players, and the players that you're dealing with, Allan, are the players that have been the best players in every league on every team they've ever dealt with, right?
Yep.
And that can come with, some players do it with a dogged determination. Some are just naturally gifted. They walk in, they put on skates, and it's like magic. But when you get them into things like summer training, they're used to being outside. How do you focus a player and go, like, I know it's summer and I know you want to be outside, but you need to be on the dry land. You need to be talking to Paul up in Montreal. You need to be, this is your eating plan. This is what you need to do. How, as an agent, do you encourage that? Because some need a little bit more of a cattle prod than others.
Yeah, I find that especially with the younger players, when they're 16, 17, they're usually super motivated, and there isn't much need to push them. If you have a 16-year-old that doesn't want to train and he's not taking his time in the gym seriously, and you've had a few conversations with him about how important it is to you want to be a player. This is critical to you becoming the player you want to be. And if he just doesn't have that in him, it's a great predictor on how far that player is going to go down the road. Right.
Yeah.
And you do see that sometimes. Where I'll get a call and be like, Allan, the player showed up 15 minutes late, and you show up, what's the saying? If you're 5 minutes early, you're 10 minutes late.
Yep.
You show up to the gym to work out with Paul, you better show up 10 to 15 minutes before your workout, not 5 minutes before, because he'll tell you to turn around and take off and come back again tomorrow. And that's the kind of, I think structure is very important for young people to have. And I fully support that. I think that working closely with parents and working closely with younger players, the key is to give them all the tools and all the information they need, from nutrition, from off-ice training, on-ice training in the summer. Our training camps have been amazing tools to help players do what's necessary for each one of them to then get ready for the next season, whether it's put on weight, whether it's drop weight, whether it's increase VO2 max, get stronger. Everybody's got a different need, a different plan, and we're able to do that and do it well. And it's a critical aspect to the overall representation of players, especially younger players.
Now, a lot of people are really interested in, especially if you want to become an agent, what it's like when they turn pro and you're negotiating contracts. Obviously, you've got your entry level. You got to get them ready to make money on that level. And if we refer back to the earlier episode, which you mentioned, players only take home about 30% of the actual sticker price of what they make on their contracts, right? It's about 30% after everything's out the window, taxes and everything. You have to set up bank accounts. What's the first thing you do? You got an 18-year-old, they just signed a 3-year rookie deal. What then?
First thing I do is I let the player know that with his entry-level contract, well, it's a great moment to sign that contract. And we always see people posting on Instagram a picture of the player with his pen in his hand and the contract's flipped open on the last page, signing his name. It's a great moment. But what that does, and what I say to players and their parents, I said, I just want to put this into perspective. What that contract has now done is it's put you on the starting line of getting to the NHL. You are today so far away from actually playing in the NHL. I don't care that you've been drafted in the first round. I don't care that you've just signed your NHL contract for 3 years. You are now only on the starting line. And you need to realize how far that road is to get from putting your name on that piece of paper to not just making it to the NHL to play a game or to play 40 games or to play 50 games. But the goal is to have a meaningful career in the NHL. That's the goal.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to have players focused on the goal, not, hey, I've signed my contract. I've arrived. I'm here. I've made it.
The work begins now.
You haven't made anything yet. You know, it's a two-way contract. The maximum salary in the American League under the CBA for an entry-level contract is $80,000 a year. So basically, when a player signs that contract, between signing bonus and which is capped at $92,500, $80,000 American League salary, when you see the number one overall pick in the NHL draft signed his contract, the only money he's been guaranteed is about $180,000 a year for 3 years from number one overall. Look at that fact from the days of Alexander Daig and Eric Lindros, who signed huge one-way deals after being drafted number one overall. The number one overall pick in the NHL draft, when he signs his contract, is signing a two-way deal, and the only money guaranteed is about $180,000 a year.
Wow. That's nothing. I mean, it's a lot, but it's, you know, relative, like you're talking about the probably top 1% of 1% in skill percentile in the world, $180,000 to start.
Right.
People don't think about that.
And that's between signing bonus and American League salary.
Now, you obviously have to help with budgets. We've discussed that before. You know, as an agent, you're discussing this with an 18-year-old. Hey, try not to buy a car that's too expensive, or, you know, try not to lease a place that's too expensive. What kinds of things, like when you're entering that sort of conversation, what do you say? Hey, listen, you've only got 180 grand here max. You got to live within that means. Is that a difficult conversation to have?
It's not, because I find players, young players especially, and their parents, because it's a conversation we have with the parents as well in most situations, are very interested and engaged in that discussion. But remember, in the NHL, players are paid from the first day of the regular season to the last day of the regular season. And the player receives all his compensation for the year, salary, between the first day and the last day. So the first payroll period in a normal season is October 15, and the last payroll period is April 30th. So when players get their last paycheck of the season, April 30th, they need to have enough cash on hand to support their living from April 30th until the next paycheck they get, which is October 15th. So if you're making, $80,000 salary in the American Hockey League, and you think, okay, I'm making $80,000 a year, and from the first day of the season to the last day of the season, you've spent through, after tax, all that $80,000, you're now broke, and you have no money to live from April 30th until October. And believe me, after April 30th, if you have no money, it's a long time until October 15. And what I tell players that is we plan on this together. Mm-hmm. We're going to cash flow this out with you with a budget, showing you month to month to month to month how much cash you're going to need on hand at the end of the year to get you through your summer, right? For young guys, especially. Now, obviously, if you have players in the NHL making big money, mm-hmm. you're not as worried. You're not worried about players running out of money in the summer. But you do dedicate money towards investments. You do dedicate, this is the nut that we have every month from, if there's mortgage payments and car payments and insurance payments and school payments, whatever it may be. And then you need to have a cash flow plan to get even players making big money, from April to October when the paychecks start again. And that's the magic and brilliance of Frank Zecca and his team, who sit with the players and their families, or the players when they're, players and their wives later on in life, and do this kind of intricate planning.
So then, you get to a player that's perhaps a little bit older. They've made it. They're 25% that made it past their first contract, right? They're into the second one. But you can, in a couple contracts in, be into salary arbitration. And I've heard salary arbitration is painful because essentially the team is coming to the table and saying, here's all the reasons why you shouldn't make the money that you think you're worth. So they're pointing out all the bad stuff. And your job, Allan, is to go to the table and go, here's why they should make all the money that we're asking for. How do you prep a player for that? How do you make sure feelings don't get hurt? Because we have seen arbitration in multiple sports ruin a relationship between a player and a team. What's the best way to prep a player for that?
Well, if you look at the NHL, very, very few cases actually go from being filed as an arbitration case to actually being heard, to have a hearing, and ultimately to a decision. I think in the last 3 or 4 off seasons combined, we may have had only 1 or 2 cases that actually went all the way to hearing with a result. It's very rare. I'd say right now, 97 to 98% of all arbitration filings settle where the agent, the player, and the club come to an agreement before the date of the hearing.
Okay.
And I would also say this: the what you just said, the impression of what arbitration is, has evolved over time. So there are horror stories of arbitration cases in the past that have gone off the rails and have been very contentious between the club and the player. There was a famous situation with Tommy Salo, who was the goalie at the time with the New York Islanders. The New York Islanders general manager went on the stand and testified in the hearing and said some pretty brutal things about Tommy, with him sitting there. And as the story goes, I wasn't in the room, but as the story goes, Tommy broke down in tears and was sobbing during the testimony, taking to heart everything the GM said about him, his character, and why he would never be a number one goalie, and all the reasons why he doesn't deserve the money he's asking for. The rules have been refined over the years to make it very much an academic discussion.
Okay.
Right? What you're doing right now is you're taking a player and you're doing a search of comparable contracts. And you may take a player statistically and do a search plus or minus 30% in all statistical categories. You'll get a wide universe of comparable players who fit within that universe. And then you'll do further filtering to that big universe to break it down to 8 players or 10 players that are most comparable to the player who's filed for arbitration. And the agent and the player's counsel are going to do that together. And the club is going to do that. And between the club and the player, there's going to be some overlap of similarly situated, comparable players, right?
Right.
There will be players outside your universe that the club will try to bring into the case because it's probably a player with a lower salary. And there might be players outside the universe on the player side who might be outside the search parameters, but only slightly, that you might try to bring into the case because it's a contract that will help you. But you're having an academic discussion, not an emotional discussion. It is not admissible for the general manager these days to get up on the stand and to trash the player. It doesn't happen anymore. It's not admissible. It doesn't happen. All you're really doing is you're arguing over the numbers, over the stats, right?
No character assassination.
Not at all. So what usually, what an arbitration hearing, what actually happens during it is it's actually very dry and boring. I remember cases went to hearing much more often years out than they do now. Now it's very rare. But I remember having a player who won a Stanley Cup, and after we're in the off season, we couldn't agree on a deal, and we filed for arbitration. And here we are in arbitration, and me and the player and the GM actually went for dinner the night before together. Right. So the hearings were in Toronto. We're in Toronto. We went to dinner. We sat together, had a nice dinner, talked a little bit about the deal, like trying to negotiate a deal, trying to bridge the gap on term and money. And we just couldn't get there. But it was not, they just won a cup together, like a month before. There was still that closeness there. We just couldn't agree on a deal. So we're like, okay, we'll let the arbitrator handle it. Well, the club had this lawyer, had an outside law firm presenting the case in arbitration. And this lawyer it was his first arbitration he'd ever done. And what he did, and I'll never forget it, he had a blackboard up in the room, and he had the comparable players. He wrote them down with a erasable pen on this whiteboard, and he wrote the names of the players down in order, and he put the amount of money they were making in their contracts up and down. And then he got up during the hearing, and he must have gone over to that whiteboard, no less than 100 times, referring, and he said the same thing over and over and over again. The players should be ranked the way that I wrote them on the board, and this is where the player fits. And I'm sitting there, and the GM of the other team is sitting there. And I get a text message from the GM as we're sitting there during the hearing. I have my phone underneath the table. The GM texts me, and he said, "If my guy goes to that board one more time, I'm going to strangle him."
Amazing.
And I'm sitting there, and I give a little elbow to my client, and he's like, "What?" And I go, "Here, read this." And I showed him the text from the GM, and we both looked over at the GM, and we were both smiling and looking at him, and he's going at us like this. "Yep, I'm going to strangle that guy." So it's really,
not as contentious. It's not as acrimonious, I guess, is the way.
No, not really. There was another time where we had also the night before the hearing had dinner with me, the player, and the GM. We had dinner, and couldn't come to an agreement. We're down in the conference level of the hotel, and you're using like a conference room as a hearing room. Okay. And the arbitrator came in, and he goes in, and he's setting up, he's taking out all his books, and he's setting everything up for himself, at this head table. And you have like a U-shaped table where the player and his counsel and me will be on one side, and the club and all their people and the league people will be on the other. And the arbitrator is sitting in the middle, and everybody sits down. The arbitrator is just about to get started. And I got up and I walked over to the general manager, and I tapped him on the shoulder, and I said, "Excuse me, can I have a word with you outside?" And we walked outside, and the arbitrator is calling the case to start, but the agent isn't in the room and the general manager isn't in the room. And what we were doing was we were making a deal.
Okay. Wow.
All right. And we made the deal and we walked into the room together and we said, we've settled the case. We have a deal. And the arbitrator packed everything up and off he goes.
Well, you know what? Maybe it helped the process. You always have told me, Allan, that deadlines clear the mind. And that's something that I think, you take through. And I do want to talk about this a little bit as we get into contracts and that sort of thing. As we're talking about this, we often see, like we see it with the trade deadline. We see it with the start of free agency. We also see it with RFA signing a couple of days before training camp or a couple of days into training camp. Explain the deadlines clear the mind, especially as it pertains to the National Hockey League and being an agent in it. Do you sometimes know you're negotiating something in the middle of summer and you go, it's probably not going to get wrapped up for a couple more months because there's no deadline here?
Sometimes. And sometimes becomes in other situations, more often than not. The function of a deadline is to create a critical stage, a pressure point in the negotiation. Mm-hmm. And when there's no pressure point, it seems that both sides tend to look at the next possible pressure point that exists as a time to put a further foot forward towards getting a deal done. So I'll give you an example. A player, Group 2 free agent with no rights to arbitration coming out of entry level, can start negotiating his deal with the team in July. Like you said, there's no pressure on either side to do anything. There's no games being played in July. There's nothing really happening in July. You'll have conversations with the general manager, maybe even daily conversations with the general manager. The media, mostly are on vacation. So you'll have a couple of media people check in every once in a while. Hey, anything up? Anything going on? No. Okay. Now you've got the footsteps to training camp starting. You hear them. Mm-hmm. There's no deal. Okay. Well, if there's no deal, the player's not coming to training camp. Right. Mm-hmm. So training camp opens. Now we've got the first day of camp. There is a pressure point around that opening of camp where we see deals get done for Group 2 free agents right around the opening of camp, the day camp opens where the players missed one day maybe, or maybe the day after camp opens and that deal gets done. If that deal doesn't get done at that time, I can tell you right now, that deal isn't getting done until the eve of the first regular season game, right? Training camp's gone because you've passed a pressure point and you're jumping to the next one.
Right.
If the season starts and there's no deal, right? There's much more pressure on both sides. Mm-hmm. The team is probably missing a key player, and the player is missing paychecks.
Yeah.
Right. He's not getting paid while he's not playing. So you've now got a much more intense daily situation going on than what you had in July. Now, according to the CBA, a Group 2 restricted free agent must be under contract by December 1. And if he's not under contract by December 1, he's not playing hockey that year, right? So that's the ultimate deadline with the ultimate pressure point. And if you're already missing games, there's a great likelihood after missing games, if both sides are truly entrenched in their own positions, that can go all the way to December 1. Now, December 1 is the poison pill, right? Both sides are at mutually assured destruction.
Yeah.
You go past December 1, the team loses the player for the year. The player loses a year from his career. the player has no deal and we go do it all over again, through a summer with no pressure, until we get to the next training camp where the next pressure point is. So you're going to go from December 1 until September and the opening of camp, right?
That's a long time. Long time.
Now, there have been a couple of players that have actually withheld their services and missed an entire season. It has happened historically. Mm-hmm. It's rare. I think of Alexei Yashin. I think of Michael Pekka. It has happened. But it's extremely, extremely rare. And then you think of the situation that you probably remember very well in Toronto with William Nylander, and he signed, what was it, within a half an hour of the December 1 deadline. It went right down to the last 30 minutes.
I was at the mall with my girlfriend at the time, watching my phone going, please God, make this happen.
Right. And then that was the ultimate pressure point with the ultimate deadline, with mutually assured destruction pointing both, at both people, everybody involved, and it ultimately got done. But it didn't get done all the way to that point. But look at the pressure points that particular negotiation went through, from the opening of camp to the start of the regular season, all the way to December 1.
The stress is intense. As an agent, do you struggle sometimes handling the stress on behalf of your client? Like, I can't imagine for William Nylander's agent that was a particularly fun time. Like William, obviously not, but it's tough.
It is tough. And that's where, people get to see if you really have conviction behind your position. Because if you don't really have a conviction behind it, you're more apt to make a deal earlier on in the process. But if you really feel and you really believe in what your value is and what you're worth, that's when you don't feel the pressure. You feel principled. And there are a lot of people, everybody's different. Mm-hmm. There are, it's once you're missing training camp, it's a very difficult thing for players to do. You're training with everybody. You've got, 15, 20 NHL players on the ice with you. Everybody leaves to their NHL cities and all of a sudden you're alone.
Ooh.
And here's the worst part. Every single day, whoever you talk to, whether it's your parents, grandparents, uncles, aunts, friends, what's going on with you? Any updates? And you're asked that question 20 times a day.
Oh,
yeah. It's a very, and I've been in that situation many times. It's a very difficult time where, and I always say to players, it's like, here's the deal. Here it is. The pen is in your hand, not my hand. This pen is in your hand, right? We're in this together. We've gone through a lot together in coming to what you believe your value is. But at any time, you can take this pen and you can sign your name on the paper. It's yours, not mine.
Wow. I think, what would be your advice for agents for stress relief? What do you because Allan, you do work all the time. Like, you do work no matter when I need to get in touch with you. Forget players. If I needed to text you at midnight, I feel like I'd get a message back within the hour. Although I try not to do that. I always wondered about that stress level. I mean, it must get to you from time to time. What do you do? And what do you tell younger agents, people getting into the business, about stress, about handling that kind of pressure?
Learn to live with it.
Okay.
Yeah. Learn to live with it. I mean, you're not going to, if you don't feel the stress and pressure and the weight of the world on your shoulders, I always saw, and I still do, representing players as a sacred trust between you and the player. And that carries a certain weight in and of itself. Mm-hmm. If you're not prepared to carry that weight around, go do something else.
Okay. So just live with it all the time.
The last thing I'm going to do is complain about it. And when I do hear people complaining about it, it kind of rubs me the wrong way. This is the life you choose to live. Mm-hmm. To say like, oh, I'm under so much pressure. It's so difficult for me. And I've heard other agents say that. And I'm like, well, then, go do something else if that's not what you want to do, but don't complain about it.
You're tough. I gotta say, lastly, and I think there's a couple of things here. Public relations, marketing, social media, they all kind of play in together, right?
Yeah.
How you are in front, and we saw this with a reporter and a player in Edmonton earlier this year with Leon Draisaitl. You're talking to these same reporters if you're a star player every day. And when things aren't going well, things can get stressful. You have players that want to have Instagram accounts. They want to have Twitter. They've got some opinions. Maybe they want to voice them, but they can be taken the wrong way. The team doesn't do well. They might get a bunch of abusive tweets that they never asked for. How do you handle the public relations side? How do you prep a player for that? How to speak to people and how to manage their social media? Because I can imagine that's been a big challenge.
Sure. And for some players, I have said to them, here's what I want you to do. I want you to pull out your phone, pull out their phone. Okay. I want you to show me your Twitter app and your Instagram app and your Snapchat. And they showed, I go, okay, delete. It's gone. Don't ever put it on your phone again. Because if I'm there saying that, I know that what they're reading on social media is malignant. Mm-hmm. And it's and it eats away at your soul. It eats away at your confidence. And, and I kind of put myself into that situation. I don't care what people, say about me on social media. Mm-hmm. I kind of like it's kind of a running gag with me where I'll just go down on like block. And I'm not pissed at what anybody's saying. I kind of take it. It's funny. I block somebody and they're like, hey, I got blocked by Walsh, and I didn't even say anything. If you actually go to what the guy said, he's basically, threatening me and my family. And like, I didn't say anything. And every once in a while I'll get an email from somebody like, Mr. Walsh, I just want to start off by apologizing for the horrible things I said about you. I've been blocked for several years. If you please unblock me, here's my Twitter handle. I promise to always be respectful going forward. And a couple of times I've unblocked the guy and I've sent an email back saying, here you go, pal, you're on probation.
So it's all about your stomach, right? Your ability to handle it. And everybody's different, right?
Exactly. And players, you get off the ice, you lose a game, you may not be happy with the way you played. You go on Twitter and you see the most unbelievable hate and vitriol coming the player's way. It takes a very special kind of character who can be able to read through that stuff and not let it get to them. So there's that aspect to it.
Sure.
But the other aspect is getting into an argument with a fan on Twitter or Instagram is never going to end well for the player, ever. You just can't do it. And you have to, many times, especially younger guys, talk to them about what's appropriate, what's acceptable, what's not. And, if you have any doubts before you hit the send button, call me, text me, take a screenshot of it and send it to me. And I'll give you an opinion right away as to whether that's something that should go out or not. So that's another aspect of it. Now, another very important part of social media is it's a great tool to promote your causes, charities you work with, ideas or concepts you believe in. And it's a tremendous tool in that regard. A player is working with a charity and they want you to tweet support, tweet about a charity golf tournament that people can attend, tweet about a banquet, tweet about a breakfast.
Mm-hmm.
There's a sports celebrity breakfast in Montreal. They have them in different parts of Canada and the US. All that is great. So there's a promotion aspect to it as well. And I think there's a public relations aspect where players are wanting to reveal more and more something about who they are, what makes them tick, what their passions are, what their preferences are, music they like, clothes they like, cars they like, and so forth. And that's great. The NFL and the NBA have been wonderful at, from a league standpoint, creating superstars.
Yes.
That's what they do. They create their superstars. And the NHL has done everything in their power to the very day to prevent the creation of superstars. I can tell you from working with NHL players now for 27 years that NHL players are the most fascinating, the most compelling, the most incredible individuals, especially when you get to know their backstories. But you turn on a game and you get nothing. You turn on an NFL game and the whole pregame is about promoting the superstars. So you start to care about them and how that game is going to be played and how this player is going to perform in the game. And the NHL attitude is still to this day, we're going to promote the logos and the crest on the front of the jersey. And any players that step out of the rubric they've established and want to in any way promote the name on the back of the jersey, that's wrong. That's bad. Don't do that. That's not how we do things in hockey. And it's that attitude that has really held back the game, the growth of the game, because the more people get to know individual players and relate to them and create, superstars drive the game.
Yes,
and
no question.
The more superstars that are in the game and being promoted as such, the bigger game we're going to have.
Yeah.
And it's not there. And it's the league's philosophy. It's Gary's philosophy. We don't want superstars. And since Gary came to the NHL, 1991, 92, I think that attitude more than anything else has held this game back from what it could be.
Well, and I think about, Allan, we talked about this on the Steve Dangle podcast many times about the way the pre-games are structured, the way that the NHL talks about, it's about like, even in the All-Star game, it's the NHL crest. It's not even, it's not, there's no All-Star on it. It just says NHL crest and it's boring. And there doesn't seem to be a fun angle to it. And I think, the last true superstar was Wayne Gretzky in my mind. I'm talking about a superstar on the level of Michael Jordan. It was they even had commercials together, and
who transcends the game. Someone who transcends the game.
Bingo. And it's nothing against the guys that are here because they could. Somebody with Alexander Ovechkin's personality can do pretty much whatever they want. PK Subban's got a huge personality. You've got great, colorful individuals. At what point, Allan, do you think the players take control of this? And as an agent, how do you advise when a player wants to step out of the mold a little bit?
I think we're going in that direction.
Okay.
It's been slow going. It's something that I've long advocated for behind the scenes, somewhat unsuccessfully so far. But I'm not giving up the fight because that's the only way we're going to get the game to where we want it to be. The players have compelling stories. Those stories need to be told, and they need to be told in a way that the fans can easily consume and identify with. And it's long past time to do that. And once we do that, I believe the NHL will take where the business is right now to a completely new and different level. It's all about the players. The players are the game. Without the players, there is no game. And it's like from the NHL side, that is the best kept, worst kept secret. They don't want people to focus on the players. And that's really where we all need to be and where the game needs to go to. Yes, the logos have a place, but really it's the players inside the logos, inside the jerseys that matter.
That's right. Yeah. The Beatles or the Rolling Stones wouldn't be great names if there weren't great bands behind them. Right.
Exactly.
Okay. And so lastly, when we talk about endorsements, everybody's really interested in endorsements. And it's always fascinating when we talk about it on the Steve Dangle podcast, because you can, if you're a hockey player in Canada, you can endorse pretty much anything. John Tavares, I believe, was doing coconut water and bread at some point. Sidney Crosby and Nathan McKinnon are big with Tim Hortons. When you've got a client, do you go out as an agent and try to find them endorsement deals? Do they come to you? And how do you know that one makes sense for a client and one doesn't, fits into a personal brand, doesn't fit into a personal brand? How do you even handle that?
Yeah, we have a marketing group inside Octagon that does amazing work. And between what they do and what I do on my own, I'm always out there looking for deals on the marketing side. We've done some great work for commercials. Jonathan Drouin has been in the Sonnet commercial, Sonnet Insurance.
Yes.
Marc-Andre Fleury did the Apple commercial where he's doing the handstand.
Yes.
With Mark Stone. So you want to identify with the right brands. There was a commercial that Jonathan Huberdeau did in Quebec that was very well received a number of years ago. Marc-Andre Fleury did a commercial in Pittsburgh with UPMC where his wife became literally the star of the commercial. And Mark was changing his baby's diapers and had the dirty diaper on a goalie stick and was using the goalie stick to put it into the trash in the bedroom. And it was all done in really good taste. So obviously you want to stay away from controversial products and controversial issues, but going out there and I believe that, and I don't want to pat myself on the back too hard here, but I believe that when you sit with brands and talk passionately about players, that is infectious. And I have found that from an initial meeting, many times we've been able to get to a completed deal, whether it's for a brand doing a commercial or appearances or social media work, because of the passion that you have for your client and being able to convince, because we're all in the business of convincing people of how good this can all work together.
Wow. Okay. Well, it pays to have an agent. Allan, unbelievably in depth. And I think, I mean, for all the questions that I had, completely answered. And I think for most people, answered. Unbelievable. Obviously, and I just want to ask you one quick thing. You're out for dinner. You're with your wife. It's Valentine's Day. And a lot of people might be listening to the show on Valentine's Day because it's a couple of days from now.
Yeah.
And you guys haven't spent a lot of time together. You've been in and out town. Client calls you. Do you let them wait an hour or do you pick up the phone?
Pick up the phone. No hesitation at all.
And your wife's good with that?
Well, I should probably say something here. I've been married now for 22 years. I've been with my wife for 25 years plus. She knows all my shit by now. It's the life that we both signed up for. It's not easy. It's hard to make, we have some friends who are really good at, they're booking their vacation in 2023 already. I mean, I can't even fathom, booking a vacation more than 2 or 3 weeks in advance, if that. And, we very much live our lives a little bit by the seat of our pants, with our hair on fire. but that's the way it is. But I also think if a player is calling me, Valentine's Day at night, they're probably not calling just to say hello. There's probably something up. Mm-hmm. And I'll take the call, and I have nothing wrong saying, hey, is it urgent? If not, no, I'm out for dinner with my wife. I'll call you back in 2 hours. Right. But I answer the phone. I take the call. And if the player says, hey, it's really urgent, I need to talk to you right now, I'll get up and I'll walk outside.
Wow. Okay. So that's the life. Not as glamorous maybe as it seems from the outside, but rewarding.
It's the greatest job in the world.
There it is. Besides podcasting, of course, right? I mean, we got to rank up there too.
Yeah, just don't tell anybody.
Okay. Allan, thank you for your candor on this one. This has been really enlightening. And I hope that if you are a potential future agent listening to this, that you're inspired, and make sure that before you get your internship opportunity with Allan, that you're not blocked. Okay. We want to make sure that you're not one of those people.